Isatah Kanneh-Mason is joining me for Classical Conversations today. She is a bright, rising star in piano performance with already several albums under her belt. One of those albums is her newest one, Childhood Tales, and that's the primary topic of conversation today. Isatah, it is lovely to meet you. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Since we are talking about childhood, I would love to learn more about your childhood. So we're going to visit the memory library here for a few minutes. I'm wondering what the first time was that you set your fingers on the ivories and you played something on the piano.
So I think at least the first time in my memory was when I was about 5 years old and we went to visit my grandparents in the Caribbean and they had a piano there. And I just remember tinkling away, trying out some tunes, and I was about 5. And then I started having lessons when I was 6, so soon after that.
Did your grandparents play piano too?
Yeah, they did sort of back in their day, and my parents as well. None of them are professional musicians, but they've all played music of some kind.
Got it. And you said you started lessons at 6 years old?
Yes.
Okay. Who was your first teacher?
Well, I actually learnt with my mum, and I also had a local teacher as well. And that went on for maybe 2, 3 years. And then I auditioned to the Junior Academy of Music, which is a kind of music school in London for people aged, sort of like 9 to 18. And I went there from the age of 10.
Okay. What was your first performance? Was it pretty soon after you started taking lessons, or were there some years in between?
I think it was, well, that I can remember. I remember there being a festival in Nottingham. I think it was like a music competition, and I was about 8 years old. So around then must have been my first performance.
Eight
Yeah,
years
local music.
old. Wow, what was the feeling after that first performance? Were you nervous for that or excited? And what did it feel like afterwards?
I don't have any memories of any of that. My first memory of what I actually felt about a performance was probably, I remember being about 11 and doing a performance of a piece I'd written and thinking, oh, I can't be nervous because no one knows how it goes. And that's the earliest memory I have of actually, I think stuff like nerves and really feeling things after performances, that comes much later.
It's the beautiful thing about composing your own works, right? Is
Yeah,
you don't have to feel nervous about that sort of thing. So, what
exactly.
is it about piano then that what drew you to piano as opposed to other instruments? Or were there other instruments that tempted you?
I was always most drawn to piano. I did play the violin and then the viola until I was about 20, but that was always a second instrument. I think the piano, I just felt more comfortable and more at home, and I loved the piano repertoire as well.
Mm. And you come from a large family, is that right?
Yes, I'm the oldest of 7.
Oh my goodness. So, what was home life like? If you could paint the scene for me, what were the sights and sounds of just your everyday life at home?
Well, we didn't have soundproofing. So you'd come home from school, we'd have dinner, and then everyone would practice. So I was used to a very noisy household. I was used to violin, cello, and piano all going on at the same time. And even if we weren't practicing, I was used to sort of loud conversation and lots of games. So it was a very lively upbringing.
What kind of games did you play?
All kinds. I mean, when we were younger, we had all kinds of crazy inventive games around the house. When we got older, we'd play board games. We'd play hide and seek and run around, all kinds of games.
It sounds like you had a very, very creative family, not only in a musical sense, but just in general life. Always very imaginative, it seems like.
I think it's having lots of siblings together.
Yeah, I have lots of siblings too, so I can relate to that, having a very noisy household.
Mhm.
When was the first time that you knew that you wanted to be a concert pianist, or was there a specific time to just kind of gradually happen that way?
I think I was also about 8 or 9 because I I remember this a bit, and my mum reminded me. I asked her where the best place to study was, and we discovered the academy. And I asked if being a pianist is something you can do for a job, and I found out the answer was yes. And then from then on, I never looked back.
That's so exciting. Wonderful. Well, let's talk or turn our attention to the album itself now. And I was looking over the album cover and I had sort of a Mona Lisa moment, I guess I'll call it, because and for our listeners who haven't seen the cover yet, it's Isatah on this, sitting on this very decorative chair, kind of looking off into the distance. And I was wondering, what is she thinking about? It's like, I can't ask the Mona Lisa why she smiles, but I can ask Isata what she was thinking about. Were you remembering something from childhood in that moment?
I think I was being told to look off into the distance and try not to get the
Sure.
sun in my eyes. I mean, with these photo shoots, you're often talking to lots of people, you're thinking many, many different things, and they snap hundreds and hundreds of photos. So I think it's very difficult to know what you were actually thinking about in that moment. And I don't want to make up a poetic answer. But I think this whole album in general does make me feel very nostalgic. And there are many pieces that do remind me of my childhood. And that is the feeling I have for the album in general. And so capturing that expression did feel like the perfect thing to have for the cover.
Absolutely. It did. It sent that message. Maybe we've cracked the code of the Mona Lisa too. It's like,
Maybe she
oh,
was just
this is a portrait, right? Am I supposed to be making this face, right?
exactly.
Well, tell us more about the contents of this album. What's on there?
So the central work is Dohnani Variations on a Nursery Rhyme, and it's a piece for piano and orchestra that I heard for the first time in concert about 5 years ago. It used to be very popular, and it's not played so much anymore. But it's a fabulous kind of creative piece. I don't want to give the whole thing away, but it's very humorous and very playful, and I just fell in love with the piece. And then the rest of the album was constructed around that. So there's a Mozart theme and variations that's kind of Mozart's take on the same theme as the Dohnani piece, but obviously very different because it's Mozart. And then Robert Schumann's Scenes from Childhood, Kinderscenen. So again, that relates to childhood. And then Debussy's Children's Corner. So that's kind of the theme running through the album. And some of the pieces I played when I was younger and some I learned for the first time later.
What were some of those ones that you played when you were younger?
Well, I played a couple of movements from Children's Corner, one of the movements from Kinderscenen and Traumerei, and I also played the Mozart as well.
Do you feel like what are some of the ways that they complement each other? And I mean, I definitely see that theme running through. These are all sets. They're very large works broken into these smaller pieces. How do they complement each other?
Well, I think it's interesting to hear different composers' takes on similar themes. And I think they all have elements of playfulness to them. Um, yeah, every single one of them has an element of playfulness and kind of almost an innocence to the music. But then all of them also, on the other side, have a sense of depth. They explore ranges of emotions, sadness, happiness. And so I think all of them kind of show that even though childhood is it can be a very playful and innocent time, it's also meaningful and it's also emotional and it's also an important experience. And I think all these pieces of music capture that in different ways.
Hmm. When you performed it, did you feel like it was geared towards children who are listening or to adults or both because some of those deeper perspectives? What audience do you hope will be listening to this album?
I would say both. It's not an album specifically written for children. A lot of the music is very sophisticated, but it's also very accessible to everyone, I would say. And so I hope that it will bring in all kinds of listeners. I think there's something in there for everyone.
Yeah. What do you feel like are some of the climactic moments in these sets? Or maybe are there movements that are like the heartbeat of these different sets?
Mm. I think yeah, I think there's one of the variations in the Dohnani goes into a minor key, and the same in the Mozart. Both of the pieces are in C major, but both of them have a section in C minor, and that's often the kind of the climax of the piece. Um, with the Children's Corner and with the Robert Schumann, because they're in different movements, there are kind of smaller climaxes within each movement, rather than there being one overall climax of the piece.
Hmm. Is there anything else you would love for our listeners to know about this album in particular?
I think it's also nice that it covers many different time periods. So we go from Mozart to Debussy to Dohnányi, and you can find a distinct range of styles in there. But I think all of the pieces, as I said earlier, still have that element of just joy and playfulness. And so I hope that people really enjoy listening to it, and I hope that they are kind of taken into the world of the music.
Hmm. The variety is wonderful. And I know one thing that's tough about being a musician is deciding what some of the next projects are, because there's just so much incredible repertoire out there. But if you were to dream big right now and say, what's coming up next? What do you think what would you say? What's your next goal?
I quite like to explore more of the core repertoire because I've been doing lots of different things, but the piano repertoire is so wonderful, and there are some very big concertos and sonatas that it's always better to learn when you're younger. And so I'll probably explore more of that.
Wonderful. I have been speaking with Isatah Kanneh-Mason about childhood tales and also about some of her tales from childhood of her own. Isatah, we're just so excited to hear that artistic flair of yours, and I hope that this is the first of many future conversations and interactions with you too. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.